Good morning, welcome to the Be Better Off show.
The Be Better Off Show.
I always say, have a great day.
I always like to start at the beginning, and it's always a good place to start. Where were you born? And as they say, the story of the father is so much embedded in the son. I read your recent profile in the Qantas magazine. Can you share where you were born and the impact of your mum and dad?
Sure. I mean, you probably asked that question with some temerity, because as you get older, you either embellish where you were born or you totally forget where you were born. But in my case, I was born in Cape Town, South Africa. I was born to a young brain surgeon and his wife. My father was a very modest person. I grew to know many brain surgeons in my life because that was the family business. And he was a very modest, wonderful surgeon. He was very happy in South Africa. My mother was the daughter of a very wealthy South African businessman, and contrary to his wishes, she wanted to get out. And so at the age of 7, my age 7, she decided she's going. And she said to Dad, you either follow me or I go alone. Which, when I think back now, knowing a bit more about life, I don't know what she would have earned. She had 4 kids. She had no money. You couldn't take money out of South Africa in those days. But on the other hand, it was quite a threat, and my dad came.
And what year was that they came here to Australia?
They came to Australia in 1961, and basically they had 4 kids under 7 and under. I was the eldest. They came ostensibly, or she says now, she's still alive, she's 95. She came because Cape Town University decided it would not admit black people. And she had a view, and she's quite a causes person even today, that is just abhorrent. I must say I agree with her. And she was not going to have her kids live there in that sort of environment. At the same time, there was the Sharpeville massacres. Anybody who's from South Africa will know about those. And that really galvanised her thinking.
So you were very lucky to have a mum that was prepared to lead in that way, which is interesting in terms of how the world's developed. Your dad comes here, he's a respected brain surgeon in South Africa. How did he find re-establishing himself, and how did you feel that impacted your journey?
Well, it impacted my journey quite a lot, even as a young kid. When Dad came here, to be honest, he was trained in Edinburgh, so it wasn't a matter of saying South Africans don't know what they're doing, which, by the way, is untrue. They're well trained, but he was trained in Edinburgh. The brain surgeons of the day in Sydney were not keen to admit him. And basically, he came as the head of neurosurgery at a hospital called Prince Henry Hospital, which is now called Prince of Wales. And there was no neurosurgery at Prince Henry. He wasn't a great businessman, my father. So he arrives here, there's absolutely nothing, there's no ward, there's no one who wants to let him in. So he goes to a very young university called the University of New South Wales. Okay. And they take him in, and they take him as a senior lecturer in anatomy. He develops all the cadavers, etc., that are still used today. And basically, frankly, paid the bills from that university. And fast forward many years, you now know why I wanted to go there, and indeed became the Chancellor.
Amazing. It's an incredible story. So as you grow up, you're finishing school. Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes, I did. I wanted to be an architect. And I don't know if there are any architects here, but in the 60s, there was no computers. So if you couldn't draw, you could have the most amazing ideas, but a total inability to sell them or indeed draw them to get them done. So it took me until I was about 16 to realise that I didn't want to be an architect. And I have to say that was only half my problem. My dear father wanted me to be a neurosurgeon, and I definitely didn't want to do that. And so I had quite a lot of shifting to do, and ultimately I knew I wanted to be a lawyer.
And when, as a young person thinking that you wanted to be a lawyer, what did you think it meant to be a lawyer versus how it turned out to be?
To be a lawyer, you were going to be Perry Mason. And when I say that now, half the audience doesn't know who Perry Mason is. So for those who don't know, Perry Mason was a great and very articulate barrister cum solicitor cum private investigator on the television. And I thought he was fantastic. And I was a debater at school. English was easy for me. Many other things weren't. And basically, that was what I wanted to do.
And so you go to university at the University of New South Wales. You go into the study of law. When did you realise that it wasn't going to be being Perry Mason?
Before I come to just answer that, it may be useful to some. I mean, in those days, Sydney University was the only law school.
Yeah.
And New South Wales University, 1 year before I came along to seek their services, started a law school.
So what was that, 71?
I started in 72 and they started there, versed on this. 71 was the first year. And I remember everybody, I went to Sydney Grammar School, said you go to Sydney University and you actually go to a particular law firm, which I won't mention in case they're here, which I didn't do either. And basically that was the way you did it. And I remember taking a step in the wrong direction and thinking this is the right thing to do. I saw the commitment of these people at UNSW. I saw what they'd done for my dad. I saw it, frankly, as the immigrants' university, and I liked it, and that's why I went there.
So was it in you growing up to look for a different angle, or do you think that's when it first started? Because most people follow the status quo. They go to Sydney Grammar, that means they have to go to Sydney University Law School and go and work in a particular place. That was quite a shift.
But inculcated into our lives was that we had to have a profession. There was nothing, novel about changing direction or whatever. That was up to us.
Yeah.
But, my grandfather, who was successful in South Africa, came poverty-stricken at 15 and made his fortune. By the way, he made it in the wrong country, but we can talk about that because ultimately it was worth zero. But the fact of the matter is that we had to have a profession, and each of us, there were 4 kids, we did that. But it was always left to us, other than the eldest child, taking on the business of neurosurgery, which I didn't do.
So you go to study law. What does your dad say when you were negotiating this outcome?
No, Dad was, as I said, a modest and passive person. By the way, he was probably running after some patient who got run over. He's always operating. But he understood. And he begged me, whatever I do it well. And later, he died in 2007. I remember he said to somebody just before he died, I'm really proud of my son. I don't know what he does, but I think he does it well. And I've always admitted that that's what I'm going to do with my sons.
Yep.
I'm always going to
Yep.
say they do it well, even though I don't know what they do.
Yep. So you go through university and choose to go to a law firm. Which was the law firm you went to? Why did you choose them? And how did you know what the practice area was that you wanted to pursue?
Well, I decided, I was one of the first to do commerce law, and I loved business. And I think it would be unkind to say I loved it because you make money from it. What I was interested in is people. I just wasn't a person that could sit out the back and, recite poetry or even, frankly, write a long discourse on something which may be important. I was a people person, and I could see that commerce law had all this opening in business. So I wanted to do business law. I loved the law. And to be honest with you, you can say, well, you went and you had lots of interviews and you were the best person in the class. It's all complete rubbish. At my brother's bar mitzvah, I gave a speech, and a guy I'd never met before came up and said, I'm a partner at Freehill, Hollingdale and Page, which became Herbert Smith Freehills. You've got a job when you finish uni. And I took the job.
And that was the job interview?
That was the job interview.
So you land as a young lawyer. What did you have in your mind your career would look like?
I was absolutely sure that I would practice law for 5 years and then I would go to the bar. I loved the cut and thrust of the bar. But I misestimated what I said to you earlier, my love for people. And one of the things I realised, we used a lot of QCs because I was in mergers and acquisitions. I realised how lonely they seemed to be. And I apologise if there are barristers here, that may be something they enjoy. But they sat in their little box, sometimes with an associate, sometimes not. Whereas when I left them and I went back to the firm, there were hundreds of lawyers who wanted to know what I was doing. There were customers that I could go talk and entertain and speak to and so on. I realised being a barrister was not for me.
Very lonely. I think their chambers were called cells, and there's probably something in that.
Could be.
So you're doing mergers and acquisitions. They made you a partner at 25?
24, actually.
So the youngest partner admitted.
Which I think was a mistake. A mistake for them and a mistake for me.
And what was the process, and how do you think they could have got it right?
How could they have got it right? I think they should have... I was very keen to go to Harvard. I had this thing in my mind. I had two uncles, both of whom were professors at Harvard. And basically I thought, I'll go there. I'll either do an MBA or a Master of Laws. And if I had known now, well, then I would have said, take this young guy who's really, somebody who wants to work hard, send him off to Harvard. Tell him to have a bit of time and then come back. Because what happened was I became a partner at 24 and I left the firm when I was 33. And the reason was I'd done everything I wanted to do in the law. I was the 32nd partner at Freehills, and there were 132 when I left some 10 years later. It was time to go. Whereas I think if they'd done it the other way, I would have stayed for a long time.
You've had a lot more longevity. Do you regret not doing that study?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not because of the study, and I shouldn't say that as a chancellor, of course, universities are wonderful, but I regret not having a bigger period of time to see how other people live. I mean, if you look at my life, sure, I've travelled, I've been lucky. A lot of my clients were overseas clients. But in terms of sitting and putting roots down in a place, I can only claim almost 7 years as a little boy in Cape Town, other than living in Sydney.
Yeah. So you didn't get the opportunity to see, particularly an institution like Harvard, it's the global, broad
Absolutely.
perspective. So at 33, you make the decision to leave. What did you leave to do?
That's a very good question. When I look at it now, I was nutty. I had a very good practice, wonderful, nurturing firm, Freehills, in those days. We didn't earn astronomical sums, but it was, I had 2 kids at the time, so it was okay. So I went off and set up my own firm. Another partner came with me from Freehills, and we set up what some would call an advisory merchant bank. I wanted to specialise in billionaires. I'd worked that out, that they needed help. And I had a billionaire, his name was Frank Lowy, and so I was able to have him as a client. And my partner at the time was very heavily, and you'll laugh at this, in Lend-Lease. So in this little room, we start our firm with 2 clients, Lend-Lease and Westfield, who couldn't stand each other, who were fighting for every site of shopping centre, but their 2 main advisors sat next to each other and shared profits.
So what was it that you saw that the billionaires needed help with?
I think that being a billionaire, just as, by the way, I think being a CEO, and I'm developing a view in being a chairman as well, it's quite lonely. Most people are sycophantic around them. I watched unbelievable conduct around the very rich. The very rich were never wrong, and yet I knew they were wrong. I mean, no one's perfect.
And they probably did too.
They did. And the interesting thing is, the higher you got up the chain, the more they knew that they had to test themselves. And so what I offered was somebody who would be just thinking of you. Somebody who would try and get you the best accountant, the best lawyer. We never underwrote the transactions. When we acted for Packer, UBS was our chosen broker, called Potters actually, we won't go back in that. And basically we would direct and we would argue with them to try and get the best fee and so on. And after about 5 or 6 years, we were the gatekeepers for 6 or 7 billionaires. It was a good life, and the firm was very active. It started to get bigger, and I liked that. That was a wonderful period. That was the 90s.
And who were these big 6 clients or big 7 clients?
Well, I don't know that I've ever said exactly who they are, but I mean, my relationship with Kerry Packer, which, by the way, I'm not hiding from. I loved the guy. Was legendary, and for me, he was a wonderful person. Frank Lowy, obviously, in the end, I went on his board. I didn't stay long, about 28 years, on the board of Westfield. And Westfield was a tiny company, and when I left, it was an enormous company and had nothing to do with me. It was all my sort of helping him because he's a brilliant guy. There were others, Kerry Stokes, we did a lot for. We even had a period doing things with Rupert Murdoch, who, by the way, was colossal. It was a wonderful, wonderful period.
So what was it that made Rupert Murdoch colossal? The 60th anniversary of the Australian newspaper, it's an incredible story.
I'll tell you, if I give you an example, I remember talking to him about something, and then he said, David, I don't want to be rude, but I need to dictate an editorial for the Australian tomorrow. And if I don't do it now, it won't be checked. He was a real newspaper man, had to be checked and so on. Do you want to sit outside? We didn't have mobile phones. Can I give you an office? So I said, Rupert, do you think I could sit and just listen? And he said, he was a bit surprised I didn't have something better to do. But anyway, I sat there. He had a yellow pad with one of those green, I don't know if anybody remembers them, those green pens on the top. He got his secretary in and he dictated the editorial. He didn't write down anything, and I think it was word perfect. And what was it on? Not on a business issue at all. He was talking, I believe, about trading 7 days. In those days, shops closed at lunchtime on Saturday. I just couldn't believe it. Every word beautifully thought through. I suspect he'd been thinking about it while he was talking to me, but that was fine.
So of all the people that you advised in that period, what was it that made them good clients and able to get the best out of you as an advisor? And what was it that made them so good at what they did?
Well, first, why were they such good clients? Their work was just unbelievable. They were always pushing to the nth degree. And your brain was, you had to keep up. And I loved that. That kept me very interested. What was special about them? I would say the way they think is different to the way I think. I've always said, and by the way, greatest advice I've ever given or indeed received is that you should know your own shortcomings and therefore work out what's good in what you do. My shortcoming is I don't necessarily know where you should go to if you're at A. Whereas people like Lowy, like Packer and so on, they dare to dream that B is the right place. What I'm good at is getting them from A to B. And as soon as I worked that out, and I had a period of my life where I was in the entrepreneurial side with Frank, we did it as part of my retainer, and I don't think I was much good at it. But I was good. If you tell me you want to go from A to B, my brain can cope with that.
Yeah. Very interesting. I heard a billionaire interviewed recently, and he said the difference between billionaires and millionaires is how well they know themselves. So it very much lines up with what you're saying. So you get to your early 40s, you're in this advisory business. Did you think again that you'd be there doing that forever, or what was the master plan?
Look, to be honest, I knew that I want to work until I drop. You talk about the influence of your father. My father retired as a surgeon at 70, but he kept working as somebody who could diagnose your back, your headaches and so on, until he was 86. And by the way, he retired at 86 because the general practitioner who sent him his work, who was 98, decided to retire. So I thought, I'll go till I'm 86 and see how I go.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I knew that it was a young man's sport. And I still believe when you're rushing around, spending hundreds of hours working, that is a part of your life which does come to an end. And the clever thing is to reorganise, keep your mind active, still keep involved, but not try and replicate what the young can probably do better.
And what was the age at which you sold that business?
Well, I was 48 and I was thinking that the dreaded 50 was coming. Now when I look back, 50 is young, but I could see it coming. And then out of the blue, totally out of the blue, we received a large offer for our business. I had always thought that the business would die with us. It's not a Kelly+Partners. There were 4 partners and we were all doing our thing with the people that were ours. And suddenly a large bank from, ironically, South Africa wanted to buy us. To this day, I don't know if one of my partners organised it. He might have. But I actually am thankful. I've never asked him and he's never told me. And so they came and they offered us what I thought was an extraordinary sum of money. And I mean, we're talking relatively in Chatham House here. I think I'm probably the only person, and now when I say it, no one will ever use me for advice. But the guy came, it was actually in the hotel there in George Street, and he put a piece of paper across and said, "That's the number I'm going to buy your business with." And I looked at it and I said, "No." And he was crestfallen. He said, "David, that is about double what it's worth." I said, "It's too much. I'm not taking it." And the reason I didn't take it was I was staying with the business. I didn't want to sit there and them telling me we shouldn't have paid so much, we should. I didn't like that. And one of the conditions of the sale was that some of us, at least 2 of us stayed, 3 out of 4 stayed and went with them.
How long did you have to stay with
5 years,
5
and
years.
I stayed 13.
Yeah. So you knew that if you took, and it's very interesting, we bought a firm into our group, and I very much admired the business, made an offer that was far larger than the market would typically expect. And that gentleman is a gentleman and wise, came back to me and he said, "Brett, I want to join Kelly+Partners. I want this price, not that price, because I can't make the commitment required to make that price make sense." And he's still with us, and it showed a huge amount of insight. It's very,
But the
very
interesting
rare.
thing is, I was wrong. We did make the value that he, and 2 of my partners remind that of me. If they were here, they'd get up and say it. But I didn't know that, and I was 48 years old. I wasn't doing this for the money. By the way, the contract, I've still got it in my drawer, basically said I could have as much holiday as I wanted. And by the way, I hardly took any because I wasn't that interested. I could do all the not-for-profits that I like doing. So my life seemed quite assured. But I felt I didn't want them to feel I had screwed them.
So you're now within a what became, I think, a more global business out of South Africa, in Investec?
No, it was already global.
Yeah, okay. So a global business. Did that give you a bit of opportunity to work more globally or see things that
Well, it's interesting. We had 11 people working in our office, and the next day, 1st of January, we had 411. And I was the chair, and Jeff Lee Levy, who was with me, was the CEO. It was quite a big thing for us. Suddenly we had 3 floors of people in Chifley Tower. Actually, to begin with, it was next door in what's the Australian Club, and then we moved next door. But it was much more international, but much more checked as well. I mean, I'd never had to ring somebody in South Africa, or in our case, sometimes in London, to tell them what I was doing. I was lucky to tell my other partners what we were doing. It was a very easy life previously. But we did it, and we became much more a bank than we were. Previously, we were the gatekeepers, and now we were starting to own our own gate.
Now, what did you know about banking when you got into that bank, and was that part of the attraction in terms of the learning opportunity?
No, I knew absolutely nothing about banking. But I should add, if anybody actually looks up the dates, I became a director of ANZ around that time. So I was starting to do quite a lot of banking. And basically, I ran the 2 together for a while.
And what was interesting about banking for you that drew you to that?
No, but look, firstly, can I say banking is the most phenomenal business. It is the heart of a body. People who malign banks are really maligning probably their experience that they've had with the bank. And not everything's perfect, I accept that. But the bank is the bloodstream of a whole body. I remember when I became chairman of the ANZ Bank, I realised that we had $920 billion of assets and equity of $68 billion. Think about it.
It's massive.
That's a lot of debt.
Yeah.
That is a lot of debt, $850 billion of debt. That's banking.
15 to
you
1
get
leverage.
used to it. Yeah, you get used to it.
And the size of the workforce at that time?
In
ANZ?
ANZ, 83,000.
Yeah. So you've stepped up from 11 people to 400. You're now director of a bank with
83,000
people today, or
Well,
at that
today,
time?
Today there would be probably somewhere about 56,000,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. So an enormous step change. What drove that? Was it just a desire to learn? Was it opportunity that was in a plan? Was it a impromptu?
Look, being honest, the first, as you probably know, in ANZ, I spent 6 years on the board of ANZ, up from 2001 to 2007. And then I decided that the GFC was obviously coming, not that I'd even thought of it, and so I stepped off.
Perfect.
And they went through
Like a genius.
and then I came back as chairman in 2013. So I missed a lot of the action there. Having said that, I'd have to say that right throughout, I was not the runner of the bank. And as I said, to be honest with everybody, my first stint was probably vanity.
And was it offered to you by
the chairman rang me up from Melbourne. I didn't even know he knew me.
Yeah.
He offered me the role to be a director. I said I don't know anything about banking. He said that was a good thing. And off we went. He was a very clever man, Charles Good, still alive. And I think it was total vanity. The second time I came back, I called it my second coming, I was very aware of what banking was. And I thought that it would be something that I really could, in terms of an intellectual joust, do something with.
So right through this career of yours, you did an enormous amount in the community. I read about the Bundanon Trust. What year was that?
Bundanon Trust would have been in the early 90s. I don't know if anybody knows what the Bundanon Trust is, but you might know of Arthur Boyd, the great Australian artist. Arthur owned a property called Bundanon, and when he died, actually just before he died, he gave it to the people of Australia. And Paul Keating accepted it and gave a sum of money from the government to go into the trust. And I was the initial chairman. And we had to work out what we did with the Bundanon Trust. And it was quite difficult. And in the end, we determined that we wanted to bring children from all over Australia to have an experience of learning about Arthur, living on a farm, and basically have an artistic experiment. Yeah. And it's been going ever since.
So you were doing that at the time of running your advisory business.
Sure.
How much were you working with now teenage children?
I wasn't working a lot with the teenage children.
No. Sorry. You have teenage children and you're working a lot.
No, but I like working. I mean, I gave up golf when the golf pro that it was teaching me saw my 4-year-old son and said to me, do a deal. Why don't I go to the beach and he'll make my 4-year-old into a golfer? And I realised what he was saying, and he was right. I was pretending to be something I wasn't. I don't go out to play golf for days. I sit at home and work, and I like it. And the not-for-profit was just the most incredible growth. I mean, I got to know artists. I mean, I chaired NIDA, the Sydney Theatre Company. I've been allowed into so many parts of the arts and education. And so my little narrow mind, which is a business mind, has been pushed, to an enormous degree. And that's made my life.
So for our audience who are less aware, you do this work with Arthur Boyd, as you've mentioned. You were chairman of NIDA. You're still the chairman of the Art Gallery of New South Wales.
Yes, for 19 years.
For 19 years.
Yeah.
And during that, do you want to share a little bit with everyone what's happened at the Art Gallery? Because it's a tremendous story.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. We've had 19 Archibald Prizes given during my period.
Mm.
It's been criticised that we've chosen the wrong piece of art for 19
For
times.
19 years.
And I will miss
Can't win
I
that
will
one.
miss next year not being the pariah of bad art. But I've enjoyed that very much. Along the way, you're given 9 years maximum as chairman or president. And so I actually did that under the great Edmund Capon. And I loved that. But then they asked me to come back because they wanted to build a new art gallery. Mm. And I love building. I wanted to be an architect. So the plans had already been put together, ironically, by Stephen Lowy, who was one of my predecessors. And I just had to get the money and put it together. And I loved it. And for the last, we finished it on the 3rd of December 2022. And by the way, if you haven't been there, that's criminal. It's absolutely beautiful. Designed by Sana, the Japanese architects. It's for Australians, indeed for New South Wales people. And the difficulty they had was they had to justify the government how to pay $350 million for a new art gallery. So I put a deal to them that we would find 100 privately if they fined 250. And Mike Baird said, done. And I remember walking out of his office, how do you find 100 million for an art gallery? And I'd been so strong. I must have been an idiot. But we did. Mm. We actually found much more than that because we paid for the art that's in the court there and so on. And we're now paying for the garden that's being built, an Indigenous garden in between. I loved it. And by the way, we finished it on time, on budget. And I think it's just a fabulous building. And it's my job till 31st of December to get everybody, encourage you to come. So please do.
So for the people listening, the things that have helped you the most in your life and career, your book is tremendous. What are the things that you think have made the most difference in your life and in your business career? I
think I have been very blessed in my life. Firstly, I married the girl who lived next door, and that was a good move. I've been extremely lucky, hardworking, intelligent, high-performing in terms of her work, probably achieved more than I have, but is very clever. She doesn't want anybody to know. I've been lucky that my 3 kids are a great thing for me. My father was a very close friend and someone I miss enormously. I have 3 siblings that I adore. I've had a very, lucky break in that regard. In terms of, just generally looking at the question of how you steer all these things, I think you work on time management. And I think I am a very good time manager.
What does your week look like?
Well, I've got to say, firstly, when it is relatively empty, which is not often, I hate it. Mm. I'm not a person who can just sit there. I like being overbooked, but I'm also, and you and I have met, I didn't keep you waiting. I don't keep people waiting. The person who sat here or wherever a few minutes ago, John Howard, you could rely. I used to see John a lot when he was Prime Minister. Mm. If you had a meeting at 10 a.m, the door would open, not at a minute early or a minute late, at 10 a.m. Mm. And John would dispatch the previous person, could be the President of the United States, wouldn't matter for you, because he appreciated the value of people. I learned that from him, and that's the way I live my life.
So how do you set up your weeks and how do you set up your years?
Well, I'm a company director, so my weeks, my diary for the next 2 years is delineated by various board meetings. And around that, my secretary is quite good at what she does, moves people around and makes sure, by the way, she always double checks. That's a thing I'm sure your secretary has worked out. The number of people, particularly those who are not paying to see you, who forget to come, is enormous. Mm. people who are paying, the billionaires never forgot. But, but so she double checks to make sure at least there's a good chance they'll turn up.
So what sort of workday do you think is sustainable for most people?
I don't tell people what is sustainable for them. I'll tell you for me, I like to leave the house at 7 in the morning. I've always done that. I don't like sitting in traffic. And so I'm in the office at 20 past 7, and I love that. I never make meetings for 7:30. They're always at 8. And I have that 40 minutes, which takes away the guilt of perhaps not preparing as well for that meeting, because I'll do it then. And then I just, like a dentist, move through the day, and I always like to get home by 7:30 in the evening. My wife used to have a rule when the kids were young that dinner is at 7:30. She'd keep them up till then, even when they were 3 or 4 years old. If you don't turn up by 7:30, we'll eat. And by the way, you can make your own dinner when you come home. It was very rare, even in those days of no computers, that I didn't get there at 7:30.
Yeah, we've always run a similar arrangement, which has worked really well. So as you look forward now, you've had this portfolio of a career. What do you see as the next decade?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. For me, I would love it to continue as it is. But I can see that you have to be magnanimous as you get older. As I said earlier, you've got to change the pattern of your work. I think people need you in a way more, but they need your time probably less. So I've got to work. I mean, I chair Barrenjoey, where we've got 370 people, and by the way, about 300 of them are not younger than me. They're half my age. And I have to be aware of that. And I love that they come and see me. That's the biggest buzz for me. And if they don't come and see me, I guess I'll close my door and leave. But that hasn't happened yet.
And you know what I've observed is you're working so well with your children, and that's been a huge joy. Do you want to share a little bit about how that happened and how you're doing that and how that surprised you?
It surprised me in many ways, and I don't know, there's probably many family offices here. I mean, after we sold the business when I was 48, suddenly I had capital, which as a professional person you don't usually have. So I had to set up some way of dealing with this capital. And the first thing I realized is it couldn't be on the premises where I do my work, because I'd never look at it. So I set up an office, which we've still got in Barangaroo, and I got some people. And over time, I've been very lucky. Both my boys did law. One is a partner, ironically, in the old firm I was there. And that both of them are interested. Working with them has been an absolute pleasure. And I never thought I'd trust anybody. I suspect you're the same as me, but we won't go there. You trust yourself and whatever, but you want to make sure everything's done. But with them, I'm very happy. And quite often I say to them, you make the decision. I don't want to. And I feel quite good that I don't have to make that decision. And if it's wrong, that's fine. I know they'll try.
We have such a privileged position with so many clients doing different things and different ages and stages. And one of the great things I've seen with you, David, is to see how this has developed with your children. And the joy that it's given you. And I've seen it with other clients, and it always sort of creeps up on them and surprises them. I've got a 19-year-old now, and I've been joyfully surprised at how competent he is. You just hope, and you don't always. Sometimes you feel that you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and when they can do something, they want to take it on. It's amazing. So, and I feel very privileged to have seen that in your life.
But I mean, one thing I've learned is if you give somebody trust, they generally live up to it. It's quite amazing. The people who've let me down have generally been where I didn't trust them anyway.
In the first place.
It's quite interesting.
So you're known as a great mentor of people, and have always had real interest in developing talented people. How did that start? Was there somebody that did that for you? And how's that contributed to your journey?
I've had 3 fabulous mentors in my life. One of them is the guy who gave me the job when I was 16 or 17 years old. It's good having a job ahead of time. You only have to get the degree and off you go. But he was a fabulous mentor of mine, a man called Kim Santo. Ironically, he became Chancellor of Sydney University and I became Chancellor of UNSW. Those were the golden days. But unfortunately, Kim died early of a brain tumour. But he was fabulous. Always thinking what's best for me, always listening to my rubbish. And I felt I owed the world quite a lot, having got that from him. The second point I'd make is, when you are the son of the brain surgeon and you live in a small community of the eastern suburbs of Sydney, every second person comes to you and says either I was operated on, my brother, my sister, by your dad. By the way, you never ask what it was for, because it could be terrible, or whether they might have even died. But you're lauded, and your dad is a king. How do you replicate that in a mere business life? And the way to do it, in my opinion, is to help other people and to be involved in not-for-profits. And it's interesting, for those who disagree with me, The Economist, I've told you about this, wrote an article about 4 years ago which said, if you want to help the world, don't become a doctor, become a merchant banker. And I didn't write it. The essence is that a doctor looks after the patient in front of them. The merchant banker has the ability to look after a legion of people.
Now, who were the other two mentors? So Kim Santo.
There was a man called Fred Street,
yeah,
who's now 97 and blind, wonderful man. He had a company called Kalamazoo. Probably no one remembers Kalamazoo, but pre-computers, Kalamazoo printed the way you could write, if you, for example, a taxi company, they could write one thing and tear it up into 5 pieces, give you the driver, you this, and so on. That was his business. And he taught me how to be philanthropic. And he's the man, by the way, who gave us the money at Bundanon to build what is now Pritzker-winning building, most beautiful building, and if you haven't seen it, it's just beautiful, on the shores of the Shoalhaven River.
Is this the Glen Murcutt building?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so he taught me that you don't just give. You basically, I mean, I know that fellow Peter Singer calls it efficient altruism. Well, Fred was ahead of time. That's what he used to do. And he used to really tell me, do you really need to get involved with those people? And I'd say, well, they're saving the world. He'd say, have you actually asked them? They seem to be driving trucks, not saving the world. Always checking.
Yeah.
And the third person was Frank Lowy. He was my business mentor. And, you know, people say, oh, Frank's so driven by Westfield. If you said to him, Frank, can I have some advice? Westfield gets out of his mind. He just sits there and says, okay, hit me. And you give it to him. And it was just, he was an amazing mentor.
And how did you first meet him, and what do you think drew him to being prepared to make that investment in you?
I met him in 1980 when I was a young partner at Freehill, Hollingdale and Page. His lawyer was retiring. He was 92. And he had chosen us as the successor. And Kim Santo and I went. And, of course, it required work all weekend. Frank was quite a taskmaster. Being young, I did it over the weekend, and by the Monday, we were best friends.
It's great in his biography. If anyone hasn't read Frank Lowy's biography, or I think it's a unauthorised biography, but it's a great book. And there's this anecdote, I don't know if you ever saw it, David, where he would, if he came up against a great lawyer on a deal, he would get his deal done and then go and hire that lawyer. Did you ever see this behaviour? Oh, yeah, but he would have been, he didn't go to high school. He never went to uni. One of the great things I was able to do as a chancellor of a university was to offer him an honorary doctorate, which was his first degree. And by the way, it's legend. He got up in front of 600 people and said, I wish my mother was alive. She wanted me to be a doctor. And he was very, very excited about that. But the fact is he has that brain that would allow him to do that, but he didn't have the opportunity. I remember when we took over a whole lot of shops from Myer. Myer sold a whole lot of shopping centres to us. He read all the leases.
They didn't ask me to, and I wouldn't have. That wasn't my thing. He read all the leases because he was looking to see that he could open them more, that he could change the footage and so on. That was his genius.
So as you look forward now, what's the big challenge on the horizon? What's the big philanthropic project you're on?
I would say I'm looking for a project, is what my answer would be.
So you're chairman of the airport?
Yeah, but that's not philanthropic. That's a business.
Yeah.
Very good airport, by the way. But no, look, I'm Chancellor of a university, and at the end of next year, I will have done it for 20 years. It's time to stand down. I've served 20 years of their then 76 years of being there. It's time for somebody new. That has been a massive amount of time, about a day and a half a week, and I love it. And I think we've built a great university. It's number 19 in the world, and it's secure now unless they stop international students. I won't go there. And I think I've got to look for the next thing, and I'll find it. And it may be something small, it may be something big.
Yeah.
But the one thing you learn in the game I'm in is that if you are keen and you are a worker, and I still am a worker, that's all I am, a worker, something will come. I still remember that I was interviewed like this after I left the art gallery the first time. And I said in the interview that I put out an advertisement that I'd love something in the arts, and no one has answered the advertisement. It's been 6 months, no one had come. So I got a phone call from a woman called Kate Blanchett, and she said, I'm answering your advertisement. And I thought, is she nuts? I haven't put an advertisement out. She asked me if I'd be chairman of the Sydney Theatre Company, and having her as the CEO was delightful.
Yeah, fantastic. What year was that?
I would say that would have been 2006.
Yeah. Amazing. So you've constantly been working, you've constantly put yourself out there, and those opportunities have come to you as a result.
So far.
I want to thank David for being with us today and go to our little question system we have here. It's impossible in really any amount of time to encapsulate the great experiences you've had. But I'd love to take some of these questions. This is a great one to start off with. What advice did you give Kerry Packer with the creation and end of World Series cricket?
None. He had already done it before I got there. The interesting thing was that our little office got very involved with Kerry Packer on rugby union, on a similar thing to what he'd done for cricket. Many who love rugby union should read the books. My partner, Jeff Levy, basically took a year off work, he doesn't see it that way, to do that. And that was an incredibly interesting time. I mean, I would arrive in our office and there'd be all these famous footballers sitting there, and Jeff would say, what do you think? I wouldn't know one of them if I felt.
What's the greatest adversity you've ever faced, and how did you deal with it?
I think probably for me, the greatest adversity was that I had a pain in my stomach a few years ago, and they did all these biopsies and they thought it was cancer in my kidney. And that scared me. As the son of a doctor, you hear a lot about medicine, and you know sometimes it doesn't go so well. And I was pretty scared. I mean, I am lucky. My brother's a doctor, my wife's a doctor, my daughter's a doctor, and they were phenomenal. But I wanted to plan it like I would a deal. I had to have major surgery, I knew that. I knew it could be bad. And I found a retired urologist who I like, whose wife I know very well, and I asked him to act for me. And he helped me, the gatekeeper, and it was marvellous. And you know what? Once I had this all in place, and I knew who the anaesthetist was going to be, we'd chosen the doctor, I knew when it was going to happen, I wasn't so scared.
So huge preparation.
Correct.
Yeah, amazing. Are you optimistic about the future of higher education in Australia?
Well, I assume higher education there is talked about university. Look, we've got a bit of a bubble at the moment. I don't know if maybe somebody here knows. If they do, please take me aside and help me. I don't know why you would stop the second biggest export from New South Wales, and I think it's the sixth in Australia, which is the export of education to international students. But both sides, both the government and the opposition, want to cut our numbers. And the numbers are very easy, by the way, just for those of you interested in numbers. Our university operates on $3 billion a year. These are big enterprises. And we need roughly 550 million to make sure that the research money we get covers the research, and the money we get from the government covers the education costs, because they don't pay full dollar. Where do we get 550 million from? International students.
So how many, for University of New South Wales as an example, how many students are there and what proportion are overseas students?
We have 69,000 students and 42% are foreign.
And so what is the government's plan to bridge the gap? Put the prices up by 42%?
No, just be more efficient. And let me tell you, people say there are three things that are said of universities. One, that they're inefficient. Two, that they're very up themselves, if that's not the words that are used. And three, that they're very left-wing. All are wrong. My university is a technology. I mean, the University of New South Wales is marvellously, it creates the best engineers, the best lawyers, the best doctors. That's what I think, and I really believe it. They're not necessarily left-wing, they could be right-wing. Are they so up themselves, etc.? Well, we are not number one in Australia. I think Melbourne is, by the way. But we're number 19 in the world, which is pretty good. And we just need to get this across to politicians. And if anybody can do that by tonight, that would be great.
If you were 30 again now, what skills would you focus on to become the leader you could become?
That's an excellent question. Look, when I look back at 30, I felt very grown up, but I don't think I was. I think I could have listened a bit more when I was 30. I think a skill to listen. I think I listen more now than I did when I was 30. I was quite a strong lawyer in those days. And you might say, well, that got you some of these people, the billionaires, they like strong people. Yes, but at the same time, listening would have been good. I think the second thing was that I could structure any deal. Now I know you need a skill to work out whether you should. And there are a couple that I did structure. Gosh, I've been so lucky in my life they didn't proceed because they couldn't get the money together. Mm. When I think back now, we shouldn't have done that.
Mm.
It wasn't illegal, but it was just not right.
Very, very interesting. Do you think the law schools, when I think of that comment, do you think the law training had enough content to get people to think about?
I think the law school that I went through, and I hope it's still the case at UNSW, made me. Because it was Socratic method. You didn't just go to lectures. In fact, we had no lectures. You were basically arguing over things. I think that it did a very good job there. The problem was that there was a certain elite that started to develop, that we were the people who knew the answers in the class. That, when I became a lecturer, which I did for 5 years, I always moved round the people who were really smart. I mean, I knew who they were. It was obvious. But I wanted one sitting over there and one sitting over here to make the class great, rather than just have an elite and the rest of them just on their coattails.
Yeah. And what makes a great chairman?
Well, can I firstly say, just like everybody drives motor cars differently, everybody does life differently. For me, a great chairman is somebody who listens. It's somebody who is strong, but not basically so stringent that you think your view is the only one that can pertain. I believe I am the conductor of the orchestra when I'm a chairman. I've got to make sure the violins, the violas, like everybody gets to hear, but at the same time they mustn't dominate. I've got obviously a soloist in the CEO, and I've got to look after him or her, and I've got to make them good, and I've also got to clip their wings if they're no good. So I think a listening, hard-working chairman who doesn't get carried away. I've said very often, I still remember it in the car park at the ANZ Bank many years ago. The guy opened the door to let me out of the ANZ car, and he said, "Hi, boss." And the whole day I was debating, am I the boss? And the answer is you're not. You are the conductor. You have the front seat, but you've got to take it very carefully.
As it turns out with all of our guests, and we've been so blessed over these 2 days to have such interesting guests and such wonderful guests, I could ask you many more questions. But in the interest of your observation about Mr. Howard and the importance of sticking to a timetable, I just want to thank you so much, David, for your in particular, how well you've worked with our firm, how well you've worked with the advisors that work with you from our firm, and the impact that you've had, the positive impact you've had on them, and your generosity in sharing with us today. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.